It started with a piece of paper, folded once, stamped twice, and slipped through a mail slot like it was nothing. But that single sheet carried the weight of a lifetime. For Harold and Clara Brooks, it wasn't just an eviction notice, it was an erasure. 42 years in the same house, 42 winters weathered under the same roof. And now, in the eyes of the city, it was just a property to be reclaimed. The rain fell harder that morning, tapping on the tin mailbox as movers climbed the porch. Their boots hit the steps in rhythm, steady, unbothered, mechanical. Neighbors leaned behind their curtains, phones raised, whispers carrying through the wet air. Are they really putting them out? Thought they paid that place off. City doesn't care about people like them anymore. Inside, Clara stood in her cardigan, the same one she'd worn every Christmas morning. Her hands shook as she pressed a brass key into her palm. The same key she'd held the day they brought their 3 adopted children home. The house smelled of lemon polish, rain, and old prayer. Outside, a man in a tailored coat checked his watch. He smiled without warmth, without hesitation. His papers were crisp, his voice rehearsed. Time's up. He didn't look at the couple, only at the doorframe he planned to replace. He called it a transaction, but on that porch, it looked a lot more like theft. No one on that street knew what was about to happen next. They didn't know that 3 cars were already on their way. That inside those cars were the very children this couple had raised, now adults with power, rank, and reach. And by nightfall, what began as a routine eviction would turn into a televised reckoning. Because when a home is more than wood and walls, when it holds the roots of family, memory, and promise, you don't just lose it quietly. Before anyone knew it, the law, the truth, and family walked onto that porch. Before we probe deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our forthcoming videos. The paper on the door said notice of eviction. But the question no one could answer, not the sheriff, not the county clerk, not even the so-called property manager, was this: who signed the order? And why now? Because for 42 years, the house on Brookline Avenue had belonged to Harold and Clara Brooks, the couple everyone called Ma and Pop. They built it when gas was 30 cents a gallon. They raised 3 adopted children here, fed half the neighborhood from their garden, opened their porch to anyone who needed a place to think, to pray, or just to feel human again. That little blue house wasn't just real estate. It was memory given a roof. So when the eviction notice came taped crooked to the front door, something didn't make sense. Not the timing, not the reason, and certainly not the name at the bottom of the page, Victor Holloway. Victor wasn't from this neighborhood. He wasn't part of the church or the local board or any of the faces people recognized from the grocery store. But over the last year, folks started seeing him more and more, leaning on street corners, measuring sidewalks, counting driveways. He said he was surveying for the city. He said it with a clipboard in one hand and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. But one man's survey is another man's takeover. 3 months before the notice appeared, Victor had quietly filed redevelopment plans with the county. Plans that turned 3 family homes into a proposed mixed-use parking complex. 2 of those homes were already gone, demolished, sold off cheap after quiet paperwork misunderstandings. The Brooks house was the last holdout. And to Victor, it wasn't a home, it was an obstacle. So the next question becomes, who let him file those papers? Because the Brooks were never notified. The bank had no outstanding balance. Their taxes were current. And yet somehow, the property had been transferred pending reassessment. Transferred, a word that changes everything. There's a difference between what's legal and what's lawful. And this was neither clear nor clean. Someone inside the system had made a move. A click, a signature, a timestamp, and decades of ownership vanished into pixels. Now, ask yourself this. If you spent 40 years paying off a home, brick by brick, tax by tax, how does someone you've never met claim it belongs to them? How does your name vanish from the title without your consent, without your signature, without your knowledge? And more importantly, who benefits when you're gone? For Victor, timing was everything. The new zoning law had a deadline. Buy before summer, build before next winter, and the investors would get federal tax credits worth millions. But there was a catch. He needed the block cleared completely, and there was one home that wouldn't move. So, the eviction wasn't random. It was strategic. It was personal. And that brings us to the real puzzle. If everything was paid, if the Brooks family had the receipts, the records, and even the original deed, why didn't the system believe them? Because in the world of property law, truth isn't what's printed on paper. It's what's stored in the database. And somewhere, someone had replaced their truth with a line of code. One keystroke. That's all it took. And 40 years of history were erased in a single upload. This wasn't an accident. This was timing. And someone wanted them gone before a new ordinance took effect protecting seniors from displacement. Because if that law passed, this house would have been untouchable. She's been here since before I was born. I thought they owned it free and clear. Something's off. He's too eager to tear it down. And yet, through all of this, the Brooks stayed quiet. They believed in the process. They believed if they just showed their paperwork, the system would correct itself. But systems don't correct themselves. People do. And sometimes those people share your last name. At 6:42 that morning, a message went out to 3 phones across 3 cities. Sarah, the oldest, read the first line twice. Mom and Dad being evicted. Today, she didn't even finish her coffee. David, stationed 2 states away, read the same message and went silent. 5 minutes later, he was on the road. And Michael, their youngest, didn't text back at all. He just opened his laptop and started streaming. They weren't going to let their parents stand alone. Not this time. Not after what they'd survived to build that family in the first place. Because each of those 3 children had been found, not born, into the Brooks home. And that home, for them, was proof that love could override blood, class, and every broken promise the world had handed them before. This house wasn't built by wealth. It was built by choice. Every nail, every repair, every coat of paint carried the weight of "we keep what we built." So when someone tried to take that, it wasn't just theft. It was erasure. And here's where the mystery tightens. Because when Sarah pulled the official county file, she found something strange. The electronic signature that transferred ownership was time-stamped 3 minutes before midnight on a Sunday. County offices aren't open at midnight, which means someone used internal access. Someone with credentials. Was it Victor himself? Or someone he paid off inside the system? Either way, it was the perfect move. Done late, filed early, unnoticed until it was too late. Now, another question. If the Brooks had proof, every receipt, every tax record, every notarized document, why didn't anyone believe them when they showed it? Because in the digital age, paper is nostalgia. Databases are gospel. And the Brooks were about to learn how dangerous it is to trust that the system still remembers you. Inactive, the system's polite way of saying forgotten. And yet, one signature almost ruined everything. The one signature that didn't belong. The one that turned a quiet life into a legal war. Who signed it? Why did the database accept it? And how did 3 adult children manage to turn the entire case around in a single afternoon? Those are the questions we'll answer next. Because when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just expose a landlord. It exposed a loophole in the system that could have cost hundreds of families their homes. And what happened on that rainy porch in North Carolina would soon reach every newsroom in America. Before eviction notices and court filings, before cameras and sirens, the Brooks home was just that, a home. The kind of house where Sunday mornings smelled like biscuits and coffee. Where porch swings creaked under the weight of laughter, where the front door had never once been locked during daylight hours. Harold and Clara Brooks were never people of means, but they were people of measure. Every dollar had a job. Every job had a purpose. And every purpose circled back to one thing, keeping their home. They met at a church social in 1977, 2 volunteers folding donation clothes after a flood had hit the next county. He offered to walk her home when her bus didn't come. By the time they reached her street, he already knew her laugh by heart. They married 6 months later, bought their first house with savings from his job at the local mill and her hours at the diner. They didn't have children then, not yet. But they had a promise between them, to fill those empty rooms with a family someday, however life allowed. Years turned. Paint faded. The neighborhood changed hands a dozen times over. But the Brooks stayed. They paid what they owed. They kept every receipt. Someone, somewhere, was counting on them not to. And that someone was Victor Holloway. If Harold and Clara were the roots of that street, Victor was the wind that wanted to pull them up. Victor wasn't born into money. He built it fast. He started as a junior appraiser at a development firm. He learned the rules of property law well enough to find the cracks between them. By 40, he owned 3 limited companies, all with the same address and different tax IDs. He had a pattern. Buy the corner lots. Pressure the owners. File early morning claims. Resell to his partners for double. To Victor, homes weren't homes. They were dominoes. And when one fell, the next was easier. His emails showed it clearly, phrases like maximize turnover and last parcel in zone. He wasn't hiding the plan. He was waiting for no one to notice until it was too late. Then came the red flag. Victor claimed the Brooks had fallen behind. 6 months overdue, he said. 6 months invisible, he swore. But the math didn't match. Their bank statements showed every payment cleared, even early. So how does a current account become delinquent overnight? Maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was a test. A test to see how long 2 elderly people would fight before they gave up. But what Victor didn't know was that this home had a heartbeat. One shared by 3 grown children who carried it in their bones, no matter where they lived. Sarah Brooks, 39 years old. The eldest. The strategist. Civil litigator, specializing in housing disputes and consumer rights. She learned the law to protect others, never realizing one day she'd use it to protect her own. Her colleagues call her relentless. Her mother calls her the quiet storm. She knows the system, and she knows how to bend it back when it breaks. David Brooks, 36. U.S. Army officer. A man who's seen what happens when authority loses its conscience. He can read fear in a man's face the way others read words on a page. Duty, integrity, discipline. It's who he is, even when he's off the clock. When he saw the eviction notice photo on his sister's phone, he didn't ask questions. He just said, "I'm coming." Michael Brooks, 32. The youngest. Part journalist, part digital strategist, part provocateur. He believes exposure is the strongest weapon of all. He understands attention, how to capture it, how to weaponize it, how to turn silence into pressure. He's the reason the world will know this story. Together, they were raised under the same roof that Victor thought he could erase. And together, they were about to make him regret that assumption. In the days leading up to the confrontation, the signs were there. Small, almost forgettable, like puzzle pieces that only make sense later. The water bill doubled, though usage hadn't changed. A letter from the utility company referred to them as tenants, not owners. A property tax statement showed a pending reassessment with an unfamiliar account number. At first, they thought it was clerical error, a typo, a form misfiled by someone in an office who didn't care enough to spell check. But then the letters started coming faster, thicker envelopes, bolder print. Until one morning, a man in a black coat stapled a red-stamped notice to their maple tree. Red, like a wound that won't close. Red, like a warning they couldn't ignore anymore. The neighborhood reacted the way small communities often do, with sympathy whispered through fences. Poor folks. Can't fight the city. The system's too big. And quietly, underneath it all, at least it's not us. Because empathy fades faster than fear. Victor wasn't just filing paperwork. He was building momentum. Every notice added pressure. Every delay built frustration. And frustration, in his line of work, always leads to surrender. He'd done it before. He expected to do it again. He just hadn't met this family yet. Inside that house, the Brooks waited, not for mercy, but for truth. They didn't know how close help was. They didn't know what was already in motion. And they didn't know that by the end of that week, their story would force the entire city to choose between procedure and justice. Because sometimes, what begins as eviction ends as reckoning. It started with a knock. Not a polite knock. Not the kind you answer with a smile. The kind that sounds like a countdown. 3 knocks that shook 80 years of peace out of the Brooks' front door. Then silence. Then the sound of paper sliding through the mail slot like a blade. Inside, The words were simple, cold, unapologetic. Notice of possession. A sheriff's card paperclipped to the top. Date of removal, today. By the time Harold reached the door, they were already on the steps. A deputy, two movers, and Victor Halloway, standing behind them with his coat collar turned up, phone in hand. He didn't knock this time. He didn't need to. He just spoke through the screen like someone delivering routine news. Victor muffled through rain. "Mr. Brooks, the date's come. You've had your notice. We paid what we owed," Harold said in disbelief. His voice cracked slightly on the word owed. Because he knew what came next, proof versus power. The first neighbor to film it lived 2 doors down. By the time the second one pressed record, the street had gone quiet. Even the rain seemed to hush. A teen whispered, "This gonna go viral." Public pressure can tilt justice, but it can also bury the truth. Phones rose like witnesses. Every lens pointed at the same scene. A landlord with his folder, a deputy with his clipboard, and a couple who refused to step off their own porch. Clara stood still, her knuckles white around the key she'd held for 40 years. To anyone else, it was a piece of metal. To her, it was the last thing she owned that hadn't been questioned. When the deputy reached for the doorknob, she didn't move back. She simply said, "You'll need to show me the law that lets you take memories." And for a second, a small, trembling second, even the cameras stopped moving. Paper against paper, proof against power. Harold opened his folder like a man holding scripture. Receipts, bank statements, a letter from the tax office, stamped paid in full. Victor barely looked. He handed his pages to the deputy. Typed, clean, state sealed. "Sir, I understand, but we have to follow procedure," the sheriff said quietly. That word again. Procedure. The one word that always comes before regret. For 40 years, that hand had fixed broken pipes, carried groceries, lifted children to see fireworks. Now it was shaking, not from age, but from insult. You could feel the moment tightening, the crowd leaning closer, every heartbeat sinking to the same question. Would they really do it? And then, the sound that stopped everything. A car horn, long and deliberate, slicing through the quiet. The first car arrived. A black sedan. Sleek, steady, unhurried. Sarah Brooks, the eldest, the lawyer. Her navy suit was soaked at the shoulders, but her eyes didn't waver. She walked straight past the cameras, up the steps, and stopped in front of the deputy. Sarah said in a clear and calm tone, "Hold the eviction. Filed injunction. Stamped this morning. You can't move them." It was more than paper. It was pause. The sheriff looked at Victor. Victor laughed, too loud, too short. A sound that didn't match his face. Desperate stalling. "She can't stop the process," Victor said scornfully. The second car. When the door opened, boots hit the ground. Uniform pressed. Shoulders squared. David Brooks had come home. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Evicting seniors under fraudulent grounds can qualify as elder abuse. And that's not a civil issue. It's criminal, David said steadily. No one moved. Even the rain seemed to hesitate. Then came the third vehicle. Michael Brooks, the youngest. Behind him, a small team. Lenses, cables, a live feed uplink already glowing blue. Michael said to his cameraman, "Angle from the left. Capture everything. We're live in 60. In 60 seconds, this street would no longer belong to him. It would belong to the public." The crowd pressed closer, the rain falling harder, the air thick with murmurs. The law was written on paper, but justice, at that moment, was written on faces. At 19 minutes and 50 seconds past the hour, he did something no one expected. He stopped reading. The pen slid from his fingers. The clipboard lowered. And in that pause, power shifted. The countdown was over. The stage was set. The Brooks weren't standing alone anymore. Still with us? Drop a high in the comments. Let's see our amazing listeners. What happened next would turn this quiet street into a courtroom without walls. Because when truth arrives with family at your door, even the law has to stop and listen. When paperwork collides, the calmest hand wins. The sheriff wasn't ready to pick a side. Not yet. He called his supervisor. He called the clerk's office. He even called dispatch, just to confirm the chain of command. And while he called, the movers waited, the engines idling. Victor paced the curb, phone in hand, whispering into his headset. His confidence had cracks now. He was used to silence, not spectacle. For once, he wasn't in control of the clock. Two sets of numbers told two different stories. Harold's receipts showed every payment made. Victor's ledger showed 6 months of arrears. Somewhere between the ink and the algorithm, truth got lost. The error wasn't random. A single digit, one wrong loan number, had rerouted their payment to a vacant property across town. In a system of millions, a typo becomes a weapon. So the bank had the money, they just credited it wrong? The sheriff asked. Exactly. And he built an eviction on that typo. Sarah replied steadily. It wasn't just fraud. It was precision. A digital sleight of hand, buried in bureaucracy. By sundown, the neighborhood had turned into a broadcast. A local producer caught the feed from Michael's stream. Within hours, hashtags lit up across social media. Hashtag elderly eviction, hashtag justice for the Brooks, hashtag stop Victor Holloway. Empathy flooded the comments until the rumors started. An anonymous tip began circulating. It claimed the children were grandstanding, using their parents' story to build their own platforms. A distraction, a decoy, a digital whisper designed to erode sympathy. Let them talk. The truth will trend longer than lies. Michael said. He was right. But even truth has to survive the noise. The lender wouldn't answer. Every call routed to voicemail. Every email returned the same phrase, system issue under investigation. When Sarah requested their internal audit log, the reply came from a no-reply address. Auto-signed by legal department after hours. If a system error takes your house, who do you sue? The man or the machine? Somewhere inside the lender's firewall was the evidence she needed. But without subpoena power, she could only wait and hope her next move reached the right desk before Victor's did. The demolition permit had been filed 3 weeks before the arrears notice. Same signature, same LLC, same timestamp Victor claimed was proof of delinquency. Intent meets timeline. He was never chasing payments. He was clearing space. He's been planning this for months. David said to Sarah quietly, and he almost got away with it. Sarah replied. The paper trail was turning against him, piece by piece. Every receipt, every permit, every date was aligning in one direction, toward fraud. But Victor wasn't finished. Confidence is a kind of armor. Even when the truth starts leaking through it, men like Victor learn to pretend they're still dry. Hold action pending review. The sheriff said. The directive was simple but powerful. It meant the eviction was on pause. For now, review won't save you. He didn't realize the review wasn't just about the house. It was about him. Because behind the scenes, something was shifting, emails forwarding, documents cross-checking, and one city clerk starting to ask the question no one else had asked before. Who gave Victor access to those files in the first place? By the end of the night, the Brooks family had stopped an eviction. By morning, they'd started an investigation. And what it uncovered next would make headlines far beyond their block. Tell us in the comments, what state are you watching from? Let us know, we read them. Sometimes the hardest part of any fight isn't proving what's true. It's finding where the truth got lost. It took Sarah 2 hours, 3 cups of coffee, and one detail that didn't belong. The payment they made in January wasn't missing. It was misplaced. The bank had credited their check to the wrong account. Same street, similar surname, different house. A clerical error that turned homeowners into defaulters. That phone call had happened 3 months ago. No one followed up. One wrong digit, one unchecked box, and a man like Victor saw opportunity. Then, the story changed again. Because what came through Michael's inbox wasn't rumor. It was proof. An internal email, sent from a bank officer to Victor's company, dated 3 days before the eviction notice was filed. The bank wasn't confused. People were. Someone decided the Brooks reconciliation could wait, but Victor's profit couldn't. Michael read the email again, his voice low as he whispered to himself. He knew. He knew the error existed. Michael muttered. That one message changed everything. The family had gone from defending their home to exposing a crime. David Brooks wasn't a lawyer, but he'd spent enough years enforcing law to know when it was being bent. He found the statute within minutes. Article 23, Section 19C. Elder coercion by deceptive means. David called the Attorney General's office, his tone even but urgent. "Yes, Attorney General's office. I'm reporting a potential violation involving senior citizens. Fraudulent eviction attempt." David said. "One call. That's all it took." Within 20 minutes, the sheriff got the same message. "Hold position. Preserve evidence." He repeated the order, his voice carrying over the quiet crowd. "We're not proceeding today," Sheriff said firmly. The line between arrogance and panic is thin. For the first time that night, Victor stopped talking. By morning, Sarah had filed an emergency injunction. The case hit the docket before lunch. A clerk stamped it, and a judge signed a single phrase that changed everything. In legal terms, that meant no eviction, no demolition, no transfer. In human terms, it meant time and dignity. Clara's fingers tightened around the key like she was holding breath itself. Harold exhaled, his shoulders finally lowering after days of tension. Outside, neighbors clapped as the family stepped out of the building. For the first time in weeks, the house felt real again. Not an address, not a case number, a home. Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke, reading each word carefully as if afraid they might disappear. "They can't touch it. Not until the review's complete." Sarah read softly. "Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it takes the shape of a trembling hand holding a brass key." In that moment, every year they had spent fighting to build a life, every sacrifice, every long night, every small kindness, came back to stand beside them. But just when it seemed the storm had passed, one last cloud appeared on the horizon. Victor spoke quietly into his phone, the smile returning to his face. "Paperwork's one thing, but demolition permits? They've got their own clock," Victor said quietly. And somewhere, buried deep in city files, one signature could still trigger the wrecking ball. Sometimes the only way to stop a machine is to find the person holding the switch. And if you can't stop them, you buy the switch yourself. While the family slept, Michael made his move. The secondary lender, spooked by the headlines and the investigation, wanted to cut their losses. He didn't argue. He didn't ask permission. He bought the note, the very debt Victor had weaponized. If he couldn't stop the machine, he'd buy the switch. In less than 3 hours, the Brooks home changed hands again. But this time, it went back to where it belonged. The next morning, the scene repeated itself. Only this time, the ending changed. 3 siblings. One last stand. The lawyer, the soldier, the strategist. Michael presented proof of purchase, the official deed transfer. Sarah filed a motion to quiet title, sealing the property's ownership under their name. And David filed an incident report listing every violation Victor had committed. Effective immediately, Sheriff said quietly. And with that, it was over. The same man who came to take everything left with nothing but a silence he couldn't talk his way out of. The story spread, and something remarkable happened. A street that once watched in fear now moved as one. They repaired the porch. They started a meal train. They passed a petition to censure Victor from future development contracts. A street became a shield. "This key remembers every prayer," Clara said gently. They didn't frame the deed or boast about winning. They sealed it away, not as a trophy, but as a promise. The same swing that once carried dread now rocked in time with peace. The creak wasn't a warning anymore. It was a lullaby. Justice isn't just what courts decide. It's what a family refuses to forget. A home is more than walls. It's history that refuses to be deleted. It's memory with a mortgage paid in sacrifice. Was justice really served or merely delayed? Should a clerical error risk a lifetime home? What would you have done on those steps? Questions worth asking. Answers still unfolding. What's your take? Paper mistake or plan pressure? We're reading every comment. If you want more ideas like this, check out the next video on your screen. It's wild. If this moved you, tap like and send it to someone who believes in dignity and accountability. And subscribe to the channel for more real-life twists where ordinary people hold the line. Because sometimes, the smallest key opens the biggest truths.